Good morning. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Got my Buccaneer Yeti cup of coffee. Yes, gotta like that. Some counterculture coffee. Gone to the local grocery and picking this up. I'm glad it's there and I am enjoying it. I hope you are enjoying your morning and your week, and thanks for spending these few minutes with me as we try to see the big picture of the Bible. And we're going to finish the first book of the Bible here, 10, 12 weeks in, however long we've been doing this. The first book of the Bible, Genesis, ends. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. But let me set the stage, because the last quarter or so of the book of Genesis concerns the story of Joseph. Beginning in chapter 37, we meet Joseph, and it goes through really the end of the book of Genesis, this story of Joseph. The overarching story of the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament as we often call it, is it shows how God's people get from the Holy Land into Egypt, which sets up the Exodus, which we'll be in next time. But Joseph is a fascinating character. Joseph is one of Jacob's sons, the three patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. At this point, just 11. Joseph is there. Jacob's name becomes Israel. God changes his name to Israel, and the names of his sons become the tribes of Israel. Now, you may know there's no tribe of Joseph. That's because Joseph's tribe is divided into his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, but that's another story. Joseph is, at the time, his father's favorite. And his father isn't afraid to show his favoritism to Joseph. In fact, one of the ways he does it is he gives him a coat of many colors, or according to Broadway, a Technicolor dream coat, if you've seen that particular musical. And this is a symbol of, even though he's young, that he is the first in his father's eyes, and his brothers get jealous of him. Not only that, Joseph is a dreamer, and he has dreams that he tells to his brothers and to his father, that basically the theme of the dreams is that his brothers and even his father and mother will bow down before him. Well, you can imagine that did not sit well in a culture like this, where the patriarch, in this case Jacob or Israel, is the chief guy of the family, and then the oldest son is typically the next in line, the one that would be considered the one that would take over the patriarch of the family at the father's death. This does not sit well, that the youngest son somehow thinks the older brothers should bow down or serve him. Well, all of this jealousy just builds and builds and builds till one day Joseph's brothers are out doing their thing. Dad sends Joseph to check on his brothers, and his brothers come up with a plan. They plan actually initially to kill Joseph. Can you imagine being so jealous or angry with your brother? It takes us back to Cain and Abel, another echo of earlier in the scriptures in the book of Genesis. But they decide not to, and through a series of different things that happen, he is sold as a slave. A caravan is going by on the way to Egypt. They sell him to that caravan. They take that coat of many colors, multicolored coat, Technicolor dream coat, whatever. They put blood on it, take it back to their father, and lie to him and basically say it looks like Joseph was killed by a wild animal. All the while Joseph's on this caravan, and they think they'll never see him again. Fast forward, they will, and that's kind of the point of this story. What happens is Joseph is taken into Egypt. And there's a phrase that shows up several times in the story of Joseph after this. And the phrase is, "And the Lord was with him," or "the Lord was with Joseph." Now, the interesting thing about that phrase is it shows up at times when we wouldn't typically associate God's presence. If you were to think the Lord was with somebody, typically you will think, well, then things must be going good. If the Lord is with them, that means he's blessing them and taking care of their needs, or whatever it is. For Joseph, that phrase shows up often at key points of the story where things go wrong. Even though he goes into Egypt, we learn right off the bat the Lord is with him, and he goes and he's placed in the household of one of Pharaoh's officials, and because of his character and the way he handles his life, he is recognized by the leader of that household. In this case, his name is Potiphar, and he rises up the ranks till he's in charge of all of Potiphar's household. Potiphar, as the Pharaoh's official, has his job, and so when Potiphar's away, Joseph is in charge. He takes care of everything. Potiphar entrusts everything to Joseph. Well, apparently, because Joseph is a handsome young fella, Potiphar's wife has a thing for him, and she makes pass after pass at him. At one point, Joseph runs away. She holds on to his coat, and because maybe she's embarrassed or whatever, she wants to make Joseph look bad. She tells her husband that Joseph tried to attack her, tried to abuse her, and Potiphar gets upset and he sends Joseph to prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. So things look bad. He's in a bad way, but the Lord is with him. Again, not typically what we would say. The Lord is with him and he ends up in prison. Yes, but because the Lord is with him and because of his character and because of the kind of person he is, the warden even notices Joseph has this great character, and he rises up under the warden's leadership in prison till he's kind of in charge of the whole prison. The warden is ultimately in charge, but Joseph is like, if you can rank prisoners, he's the top prisoner. He's got the most authority, probably the most freedom in prison. And one thing happens in prison that's very interesting. This dreaming thing comes back. A couple of people are thrown into prison. Pharaoh's officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker. So the cupbearer is the one that tastes his food to make sure it's not poisoned before Pharaoh eats it. The baker is the one who makes some of the food. They end up in prison. They both have dreams, and Joseph interprets them. He interprets the cupbearer's dream to mean in 3 days you're going to be restored to your position. You're going to go back to serving Pharaoh. The baker thinks, well, hey, my dream is similar. Maybe I'll get a good answer. He tells his dream. Joseph says, your dream says the opposite. In 3 days you're going to be executed. You're going to be found guilty. You're going to die. It's not going to be a good thing. And that's exactly what happens. The cupbearer is restored. The baker is killed. It's kind of a harsh thing, but that's what happens. The cupbearer is so grateful. He promises Joseph he'll remember him. But like so many of the promises we make in the busy life that we have, he forgets. And time goes on until Pharaoh himself has a dream. And nobody can interpret it. And that's when the cupbearer says, hey, I remember a guy in prison, and he calls Joseph to come before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh gets from Joseph the interpretation of his dream, and it's a pretty potent thing. The dream is a dream that means there are going to be 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of a devastating famine. And Joseph tells the dream, he tells the interpretation, he even goes so far as to tell Pharaoh, this is what you should do. You should take in extra during those years of plenty, so during the years of famine you'll have an abundance and you can provide for your people. And the Pharaoh says, man, you're right on. I'm going to put you in charge of that plan. And once again, the Lord is with Joseph. He rises to be second in charge almost of all of Egypt, right under Pharaoh. What started as tragedy, as a lie to the father, as maybe killing him, but eventually selling him and forgetting about him, turns into Joseph being one of the greatest positions in that time under one of the greatest empires in the world. Well, as time goes on, the dream comes true. There are 7 years of plenty, and Pharaoh under Joseph collects a percentage of all the grain, puts it in storage, so that when the famine comes, they're able to sell back this grain to people that can't grow enough for their own families and crops. One of those people happens to be Joseph's family. They experience the famine. They hear that Egypt has grain, and so some of his brothers come to Egypt looking to buy grain, and they find themselves face to face with Joseph. The thing is, they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. He knows exactly who they are. And there's some back and forth. I'll spare you all the details until finally he reveals himself to his brothers. I am Joseph. And they are amazed and they're scared and they are all these things. But ultimately it leads to a great family reunion. They go back, they bring their father. Their father sees and he's reunited once again to Joseph, his son. It's a beautiful moment of reunion. But like so many things that happen in the normal course of life, Jacob, his father, Israel, his father, dies. And his brothers now are worried because they're thinking, okay, father's here, he's not going to harm us. But now that father's dead, we could be in trouble. And so they go before Joseph and they beg for his forgiveness. They said, in fact, we will be your slaves. We will do anything, just because they think he's gonna have a grudge. He's going to kill him. And Joseph says, Genesis 50, verse 20, one of the verses that defines his life and his legacy. It says, what you intended for evil, God intended to accomplish good. In fact, the saving of many lives. And that's exactly what happened. Their jealousy that led to them maybe killing, but ultimately selling him into slavery, thinking he was as good as dead, that evil act, that act meant to harm him, ultimately, because God was with Joseph, he rose up, and now that act put him in a position to save many lives. The whole civilization of Egypt, including his family who now live in Egypt. It's a remarkable thing that Joseph, at that moment, can see God's hand and God's providence. Even through all of his difficulties, even through all of his suffering, God used it for good. And when we look at the story of Scripture, we're reminded again and again that these themes keep popping up. And maybe there's no greater place where this theme, that what humanity intended for evil turned out to the good, the saving of many lives, is what happens to Jesus. Because the people of Israel, the religious leaders, the Roman executioners intended and did harm Jesus. He was betrayed by one of his own disciples. He was falsely tried in a series of sham trials. He was eventually condemned to death, and he was crucified on the cross. Yes, not only was harm intended, but harm was done to Jesus by his crucifixion. But what humanity, what all of those people intended to harm him, ultimately God intended for good, for the saving of many lives, because it's his death and resurrection that is the basis for our salvation. And through faith in who Jesus is and what he has done for us, our lives are saved. That's the message of salvation we still preach today, 2,000 years after the life of Jesus, that there is hope, there is forgiveness, there is life through him and through what he did for us. We'd love to walk with you as you learn more about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, as we as a church family try to learn more about it, what it means to follow Jesus. We get together a lot. Sunday mornings, 9 o'clock is our large worship gathering, and time and again we go back to that theme. Who is Jesus, and what has he done, and what does that mean for us? So we invite you to join us. We invite you to keep tuning in on Wednesdays as we see again and again in the Scriptures these hints and these echoes of God's goodness and graciousness and God's desire to save even sinful humanity because of his great love for us. So I'm going to leave it with you there. I hope to see you on Sunday. 9 o'clock we'll be here. If not, we'll pick up the story with Exodus next Wednesday. Have a great week.